This Sunday, we will continue the Old Testament story of Jacob that we've been hearing from Old Testament stories these last few weeks. And we're going to continue today because Old Testament is great. It's one of my favorite things. The stories are fantastic. And I'm also kind of preparing you because this September and October, we're going to be doing a 2-month sermon series that focus on the Old Testament. And so I figured a little bit now won't be bad. So this week, we continue the story of Jacob. And these Old Testament stories are great. In fact, it reminds me of a little story I heard once about a child who was sitting at her grandmother's feet, and her grandmother was reading her the story of creation from the book of Genesis. And as that grandmother was reading this wonderful story, she realized that the child was rapt and attentive and so much more still than she ever was for anything else. And finally, the grandmother asked the child, "Well, what do you think of the story?" "Oh, I love it," she said. "You never know what God's going to do next." I think that's why I love the Old Testament. You never know what God is going to do next. But you see, we've been trained to predict God, to think we know God and what God is going to do in the world. We have prepared ourselves in certain ways, and over years and years of living, and hopefully years and years, decades even, of going to church, we're prepared to see God in certain ways. We're prepared to see God, say, when we read the Bible, which we all do, I know, or we're prepared to see God when we come to church. Or perhaps we're prepared to see God in the faces of our family or friends, or maybe even in the beauty of nature around us. But I think that sometimes we're too selective in where we think we will see God, where we expect to see God. We often don't expect to see God in those uncertain places, or perhaps when we're afraid, or places that scare us. We're not expecting to see God in every new experience, only where we have predicted God will be. When in fact, God is often waiting right around a corner to surprise us with the beauty. We sort of see that surprised by God moment here in Jacob's story in our Old Testament lesson today. Now let's put Jacob into context. We remember Jacob, the younger brother, the younger twin. Jacob is the deceiver, right? Jacob is working the angles and trying to get exactly what he wants. And by the time we get to today's story, Jacob has deceived his older brother. Jacob has deceived his father, and when he deceived his father and received the blessing, his older brother, who was much bigger and stronger than Jacob, was not very happy. And so Jacob had to literally run for his life from his older brother. But blessings are what they are. And by the time we get to today's lesson, Jacob has been sent away to find a good wife. That's where Jacob is, on a journey to find a wife. And he gets about as far as he can get and falls asleep. Jacob is a man on the run, both literally and figuratively. Jacob doesn't really know who he wants to be. And so he tries to be the things that the world tells him to be. And I think we all understand what that kind of life is about, right? We all understand what being on the run is like. Some of us are just running every day to do errands and keep all the balls in the air. Some of us may be running from past heartbreaks or failures. Some of us may be running toward a future that is bright and hopeful, the kind of future we want. One way or the other, we're all kind of running, moving fast almost all the time. And today, we see that Jacob is doing the same sort of thing. But when he stops and when he falls asleep, something incredible happens. He sees this ladder going up into heaven, angels descending and ascending, and we might think of it as a literal ladder to heaven. But maybe we can imagine it as something different. Maybe we can imagine that Jacob finally just stopped, slowed down, and was still. And the ladder gave God an opportunity to come to Jacob. How many of us stop long enough to let God catch us or find us or amaze us with beauty? Jacob today sees this incredible image of ladders to heaven. And what is his response? Surely the Lord is in this place, and what? I didn't even know. how often have we had that sense, surprised by God, where we know surely the Lord is in this place, and man, we did not know it. Jacob understands that he has been blessed. And Jacob understands through the promise that he's received from Abraham and Isaac that he's meant to be a blessing to others. We, very similarly, have been blessed and are meant to be a blessing. We hear that from Jesus' own words in today's gospel lesson, where he tells the story of two different people sowing two different kinds of seeds: good seed and bad seed. Good seed that grows beautifully and is a blessing to others, and bad seed that tries to choke out those blessings. We are meant, as Jesus says, to be the good seed. But we live in a world where there is plenty of bad. We live in a world where there are things coming at us all the time, pulling us and pushing us in order to choke out the kind of blessing that we're supposed to be to others all around us. Now, blessing is one of those words and ideas that has become a little kitschy. The other day I saw this super tacky t-shirt with big hashtag blessing across it. You know, those sorts of things make me nuts, and I apologize if you have one. Sorry. That kind of idea of being a blessing out in the world has become sort of cheap, right? It's like you get a buy one, get one off coupon and you're like, I've been so blessed, you know? It's not quite that kind of blessing. Blessing is something deeper, right? Not something self-centered, something that goes through us and out to others. It is about relationship. It's about something that draws us together. It's about giving toward others. That's what we're called to do. That's what Jacob realizes God is doing for him. That's the story Jesus told us about the seed, what we can actually be out in the world. And those blessings don't have to be gigantic and profound. They can be simple little things that change someone else for the better. I saw a story a little while ago about kids on a school bus, and every day they would drive past this one little house, and an older woman would sit in the window of her house and wave at them. Same time every day, and these kids loved this. This woman did this for years and years and years, until one day kids on bus number 7 drove past the house, and she wasn't there. And that happened for a few days, and so finally the bus driver, whose name was Carol, decided she needed to figure out what was going on with who they called the grandma in the window. And so she showed up to the house with flowers, knocked on the door, only to find out that the grandma in the window, whose name is Louise, had had a stroke and was in a rehabilitation center across town, and that's why she hadn't been in the window waving at the kids. And so Carol went back to the kids and told them what had happened to Louise, and they were concerned that Louise had to sit in a room and couldn't see them. And so they decided that they were going to pose for a picture in the bus. And so one afternoon, all the kids got up on the window and acted like they were waving, and they took a picture and they blew it up and they put it on a poster board, and they went down to the rehab center and they brought this big picture of a bus into Louise's room to make sure that she had smiling faces to look at every day, just like she did at her home. That's a blessing to her. When they walked into that rehab center, surely the Lord was in that place. And that kind of simple act of love keeps all of those bad seeds at bay. Each one of us has been blessed, hashtag or not. And we are called to be a blessing to others in this world. May we be filled with the Spirit, pushed out those doors, and confidently and courageously love and bless, all in the name of Christ. Amen.